Greetings.
Holy shit.
Good evening. Welcome to the gutter. Everybody ends up here eventually. It is only a matter of time. My name is Aldous, and I will be your host this evening. Your co-host, my Rio, on this intergalactic rocket careening off into the ether of the periphery, is none other than JP, RaidenRadio. Greetings, my friend.
Hello, hello.
Now, you just launched How to Die 2 tonight, so congratulations on that.
Yeah,
It
it was
going
a good
pretty
time.
well. So before we get into our glorious guest and the elusive topic that he has chosen for this evening's discourse, let us greet our chat, and I sigh heavily because the first one is Neff, and, you know, he shows up early and then goes to bed, and it's just disappointing. But Rick Saylor showed up with a "What's up?" Great to see Rick. Thank you so much. Mad Ruth, hello. Good to see you, sir. Snuggy Jr., my Saturday brother from the comic show. Thank you so much for joining. And my guest is personally hoping for a shit show. That's always a good sign, guys. With the wink and the smile. Hostman Socrates, 12 Angry Men. He can read. The topic for tonight, before I even get to drop it, might have something to do with the fact that it is plastered in rather large font right above our heads. Cheers. Cheers to you as well, sir. The Shagsworth, and, of course, Snuggy, greeting Hostman. Oh, look, and Corey showed up. Wait, there's got to be a problem. The show just started. Corey usually shows up about 45 minutes in. Corey, are you feeling okay? I'm concerned. With that being said, each episode of The Gutter, I try to make a unique experience, a mutual journey that the hosts and the guests take through whatever topic du jour that the guest has decided to either bore us to death with or challenge us, depending on the topic. This is delved into the depths of childhood trauma with Brian, of Eris Saga to introspective tributes of awe and reverence, with a creator inspired by Todd McFarlane's Spider-Man for some odd reason, with Mad Ruth, to last week's deep dive back to the post-war years of the late 40s and early 50s with the early days of the Justice Society of America with DC Comics and Comics by Dylan. To that, end, or I guess more in spite of it, we kind of find ourselves well outside the realm of comic books this evening, but still within the realm of storytelling for sure. For what is storytelling without conflict? And when you talk conflict, there is certainly none greater than the discourse surrounding a man's life. The highest duty of any citizen in a republic, the most important vote of the three that you have, is the vote of a juror. 12 men isolated, holding the fate of another in their hands. As juror number 9 actually puts it in the movie that we are going to be discussing tonight, much more eloquently than I could ever paraphrase anything out, regarding that power of being the lone dissenter. It's not easy to stand alone against the ridicule of others. A statement steeped deeply in the individualism that highlights both the ethos of that this country was founded upon, that I personally believe in, and that I know our guest believes in as well, based off of past conversations with him. The power of a man to say no, or in this case, not guilty, is unbridled in a republic for how much power it can contain. The topic is certain to get some passions flared, and I've been looking to this all week. Not with the normal sense of foreboding dread, for no matter how many times I do this, no matter how many times I fire up a show or press the live button, how many times I join a panel, I always assume that I am going to make more of an ass out of myself than I ever expect. Tonight, we will be discussing the absolute fantastic and classic, arguably, one of the best films from 1957, and that's saying a lot. 12 Angry Men, with a screenplay written by Reginald Rose, who is probably more well known for his Twilight Zone episode, The Incredible World of Horace Ford, in this audience, than anything else, or the previous year's 1956 Crime in the Streets, if not the Seawolves, depending on your predilection for war films. Directed by the absolute legend Sidney Lumet in one of his first major directorial roles, and starring such phenomenal actors as Henry Fonda, Lee Cobb, E.G. Marshall, and Jack Warden. Oh, and the cinematography was by Boris Kaufman, edited by Carl Lerner. I mean, all these names go on to become just absolute chads of filmmaking over the next decade and a half after this. This is just one of those moments when the kaleidoscope hit that perfect prismatic jet thing and all the talent fell into one thing. I know people curse the studio system, but shit, man, they made the best movies. So selecting our this work this evening, our guest, the honored one, the Shagsworth, Tom. Great to have you on, Shags. It's been a while, man. It's I think the last time we were on the air together was back when the Midnight Oil was still around.
Yeah, I was actually trying to think of, without looking back at all of my videos, like when that was. That was a while ago, man. But
yeah, I think that was in the euphoric times of the closeout of 2021-ish, in that range. Back when shit wasn't as bad, gas was still $3, or less than $3 a gallon, and it wasn't a daily battle to find a topic that didn't involve something in the alphabet community. So, with all of that being said, why, of all of the topics that you could have ever picked, did you pick this luminescent film from 1957?
as I think of, I don't know, it's a movie that, I mean, you said, what do you want to talk about, basically? And you said, well, we'll pick something that you're familiar with. And because I've wanted to talk about this movie with people before, I just thought, well, what better person to talk to than you? I mean, this is like right in your lane. I just thought, well, if anyone could appreciate this film, it's all this. So let's sit down and talk about it, because it's truly one of my favorite films. I mean, in the top 3 for sure.
No, it is a beautifully executed film. It's very much a film of its time.
Yeah.
And when I say that, the ending in particular is, I mean, the first 3/4 of the film is absolutely brilliant, and the ending kind of comes up on you at the very last minute, and it's meant to be very dramatic and poignant.
Right.
And it's written, I guess the way it's written is in a style that really only David Mamet really does anymore, and that's almost like a Broadway play.
Mm-hmm.
And really it is. It's a play. It's a single room play with 12 protagonists. And, 12 protagonists who exchange back and forth as the discourse changes, who's the protagonist and who's the antagonist. And now those roles shift throughout, but in general, you've basically got one individual that is the protagonist and one is that his antithesis, his antagonist, throughout the course of that discourse over the innocence or guilt of the individual, who really, outside of a brief glimpse in the intro, the setup, you really don't care. It's not really it doesn't matter who the defendant is. It doesn't matter who the prosecuting attorney is. This is 12 men discussing things that you, as the viewer, didn't witness. So you're only hearing them through their descriptions of what they saw. So when you're getting into that, it's 1957. You don't, number one, I mean, outside of you, I know you're a film fan, and a handful of others, most people would just immediately go to the most recent remake, which was 1997.
Right.
And it was a TV replicate. Most people don't go back and actually watch the classics. What is it about classic film in general, if we could just touch on that before? And Corey, no, there are no babes in this movie. It's called 12 Angry Men, and it's set in a jury room.
Yeah.
There's no women. I think there might be at the very end, when Henry Fonda's walking out of the courthouse, a woman in like a short skirt might kind of walk by. And that's the extent of it. So if you go all the way to the end and miss all the important stuff, you might catch some calf.
Yeah, I think you're right.
But so what is it? What is it that's so poignant about this in particular, or just films from this era that draw you to them? Before we get into the meat, so to speak.
Yeah, well, I think I mean, movies they're just not made like this anymore. And I think it's truly art in that, like you said, it's a Broadway play. And I think a lot of movies in this time, or, leading up to this time, were just that, like they were easily replicated to the stage. I mean, everything was written for the stage at one point, and then, motion pictures, as they got bigger and bigger, they were able to sort of branch out. But this was like, you're telling a story so beautifully without moving away from a single room. I mean, there's, at the beginning and the end, they're in a courtroom, and then they're, walking outside. But I mean, you just don't, I didn't even see the 1997 remake because I wasn't interested in what they could do to ruin this for me. Because I don't think I ever once, when I was watching again this week, I maybe had a couple criticisms again as I took a more critical eye. But I feel like we've gotten away from what telling a story really is, at least through motion pictures. This, I always say, if you really want to judge a movie on how well it's made as a film, turn the sound off and watch it, or watch like the first half an hour and see if you can understand what's happening without sound, because that will show you if it's telling like a motion picture story rather than like a story just told through dialogue and exposition. Now we can get into a whole bunch of stuff of how the film has changed and how we don't always need that. But to me, as a film, I wouldn't call myself a fanatic, but as a lover of movies and film, and one studied it, there's nothing better to look at as far as like how you make a motion picture movie.
No, and I couldn't agree more. I mean, there is certain, we're in an era here. Like I said, this is studio, the studio system. Films are being produced by the studio to make money, but the people that they have hired tend to take it very seriously. They're not artistes, they're professionals, and they view this as a professional output. They stay within budget. They stay on, for the most part, they stay on time schedule. And if that means 16-hour film days and long days in the edit booth to get it done, they get it done. And what they tended to produce during this period is more often than not a higher quality than a lot of stuff we see today. Now, you can argue the reasons for that all you want. And I do want to touch on some of the demographic transition model sociological concepts later, and not get into that now. Same thing with like the Ash conformity principle and a bunch of other stuff that Raiden's going to absolutely love when we get to that portion of it. But when you're talking about the general tones of the psychology of the individual characters, is there anything that really jumps out at you? I mean, because really, the modern parlance of what this is going to be called is it's just 12 white men. There's no diversity, and yet. As the film progresses through, I think that's the absolute brilliance of it, is you see 12 men, and yeah, they're all white. But as the discourse begins to roll and as they start to discuss everything after that first vote and Henry Fonda says not guilty, what you find is the floodgates open. And while they all might look the same, and outside of, you've got two guys that are wearing suits and a couple of guys that are blue collar and everybody else in between, but even their outlooks on life. Some take it seriously, some don't. Some take it too seriously. Some are taking it not seriously enough. Some are more worried about where they're going in an hour. Some are worried about, well, what if we don't get it right? Everybody's looking at it from a different perspective and a different angle. Do you think that was something that's key in the engagement?
Yeah. Like, so when people like myself talk about like how films have gotten away from like what diversity means in films, a lot of companies out there want to say like, oh, look how diverse we are. Like we need these quotas. You can't be eligible for the Academy Awards without a certain percentage of diversity in your films. But this film does diversity beautifully because while everyone shares the same melanin levels, for the most part. They all come from very different socioeconomical backgrounds, and even like you could tell that I mean, there's some very smart men in the room. There's some very I think juror number 12 is, I would say, he's pretty aloof most of the time and not so bright, but he has
Right.
a nice job, and so that's like diversity of thought, intellectual diversity is something that is really apparent in this film. And while on the surface, when you first watch it, you're like, if you were to show this nowadays, you might get a whole room full of people go, "Oh yeah, well, all these 12 white men." Like, yes, but watch this unfold, and how these people come from wildly different backgrounds. I mean, within the first probably 10 minutes, we find out one of them is in a very similar situation to the defendant. So it's just so amazing, beautifully done. And one of the reasons, again, that this movie is just top tier in my opinion.
For sure. No, let's go real quick. For anybody that hasn't seen the film, there will be spoilers from this point on.
Yeah.
But first, let's just go through real quick. I'm just going to give a rundown. If you haven't seen the film recently, I'm just going to go through some of the jurors and who they are and who they're played by. You've got juror number 1, who is the foreman, played by Martin Balsam. He is an assistant high school football coach. You've got juror number 2, played by John Fiedler. He's a bank clerk. Juror number 3 by Lee Cobb. He's a businessman, and very early on you find out he's a little bit of a distant father to his son. They had a very physical altercation and have not talked since then. Juror 4 is E.G. Marshall, a very rational, analytical man. He's a stockbroker. Juror 5, Jack Klugman. Jack Klugman, in this, he plays a paramedic from Harlem, a fairly violent, at this time, slum comparatively to the rest of New York. He is the youngest juror in the show. And when they remade this, Klugman, of all of the living cast at the time in 97, had the most scathing remark you had the great Sidney Lumet direct it. You had one of the most amazing casts that could ever be assembled. I don't know what the hell they were thinking. And that's paraphrased. You can go look up the actual quote, but it was pretty brutal. And you don't see actors talk that way too often anymore. Juror number 6, Edward Binns, played by Edward Binns. He's a house painter. His character is a house painter, very blue collar. Juror number 7, a marmalade salesman, played by Jack Warden. I think this is Jack Warden's best role. I don't think I've ever seen him in anything where he just comes across as he's completely affable, and you really, from the first moment he talks, you understand that the last place he wants to be is here. And he makes it very clear he pulls out those Yankee tickets, and it's this great little nervous thing where he hits the tickets against his hand. Like you do if you're waiting in line to go into an arena or go into a ball game. You just kind of hit the tickets against your hand while you're waiting nervously. Yep. He does that in the background so many times, and it's just this subtle reminder that I want to be anywhere but here, man. Let's get it going.
So he was I couldn't think of his name. Jack Warden, he was my favorite juror number 7, because he plays the dad in Dirty Work, which is that comedy with Artie Lang and Norm Macdonald from like 92 probably or something.
Okay.
Yeah, he's in like the hospital. It was like one of probably the last films he did before he died. But anyways.
All right, and then obviously, famously, juror number 8 is Henry Fonda. He's the one that starts it all off by being the only not guilty vote in the first vote that the jury does. Joseph Sweeney is the eldest of the jurors, and also the first to agree with Fonda on the second vote, and he's the one that sets everything into motion. Juror 10 is Ed Begley. He's a garage owner, very loud and boisterous. He kind of represents the blue-collar bigotry that is often presented. He often is the one that's painting with a broad brush. Juror 11, I did not note down who played him. I apologize. But he's a watchmaker and an immigrant, a naturalized citizen. And then one of my favorite characters for just how he's portrayed, because anybody that's been around advertising or salespeople,
Yeah.
this guy hit his role so well. I mean, the only thing he was missing was like snapping his fingers and doing finger guns at you and going like,
Yeah,
"Hey,
yeah.
it's okay, shooter." And
Yeah.
that was Robert Weber as the advertising executive. Let's see if we're going to run this up the pole. And let's see if anybody salutes him.
Yeah.
So
Oh, man.
that's your cast of characters. And what precedes in the discussion is, like I said, they do an initial vote, and only Henry Fonda's character, juror number 8, he's the only one that says not guilty. And his general impression, his general point is that we're talking about somebody's life. I mean, it's not right to decide it just in 5 minutes. And they go back and forth, and he says, "Fine, okay, I'm going to abstain, and I want you to do another vote. And if you all vote guilty, then I'll go along with it." And they do another vote, and it's guilty, 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 guilty. And they do a great job of building that suspense, because it's not like the third or the fourth. They get 6 deep before, boom, not guilty. Well, now we've got a show. Now we can move in, because now we've got drama. Because that was a blind vote. So we don't know who voted no. And then juror number 9 admits that I was the one that voted no. He convinced me. And then from there, it accelerates. And it becomes a test of wills. They get into some ridiculous stuff about, well, I found this stuff that matches the murderer, and what angle was it at, and was the woman wearing her glasses? But at the end of the day, it's a contest of wills. It's the Asch conformity principle in action. And it's how forthright and how convincing can you be with your view, and how forceful can you get it across? And also, what pushes an idea better? Is it forcefulness? Because that certainly does work with some of the jurors. If you be loud and boisterous, people come to your side. But at the same time, with juror number 10, there's a beautiful outburst where he crosses that invisible social line and gets a little too aggressive. And it's this great moment where almost all the jurors turn their back on him or look down on him with disgust. Except for one. Only one's meeting his eye, and that's the stockbroker. The juror that is the most analytical, because he's always sitting and always evaluating.
I always think of that moment. It's one of the best. I don't know, like there's so much that I relate to in this movie, just because I think it's a timeless story. Like, it's another thing that makes this movie great, right? Is that you could take this and apply it to today. We have all been in this situation at some point or another, or been in the room when this person was talking, and you're just like, no way. And you just turn away, or you walk out of the room. Like, you just let the person go off. It's such an iconic moment in this film.
So I have to add a point about that scene right there, and it was like, okay, he goes on this tirade, right, about how, those people in that neighborhood don't care about violence. It means nothing to them whatsoever, and they're all, they all turn their back in disgust, right? But if what they're saying, if what everybody else is saying is true, and that the boy didn't really kill him, then that means that the dad was actually killed by somebody else. So that neighborhood is really as violent as what he said. So, you know what I mean?
Right.
Like, it
Well,
is
no,
actually
Juror number 10, as I stated, is a garage owner. He's in the area. All these jurors live in the general area, so he's from that area, and he's familiar with it. He's a garage owner. I mean, by saying that you own a car garage, you're implying that both a lot of socioeconomics at the time, but also that you're not dealing with the cream of society. He's not getting people from the Hamptons that are bringing their cars in. He's dealing with the local neighborhood. He understands what's going on in the street. Yes. Is he over the top in his delivery? Absolutely. But from where he's coming from, he's trying to run a business, and all he sees is that going on around him. That's in a moment of emotional outburst. And I think that's what makes this scene all the more powerful. This scene is not just the jurors like turning their backs on him because he's going over the top. They're turning their back on the realities of the situation because most of them don't have to deal with it.
Well,
It's not something that they've experienced, so they're looking at it as, oh, he's being loud and boisterous because he's just angry.
yeah, and it like there's an even deeper meaning too, is that like this started out with 11 out of the 12 men saying, well, for the most part, that this boy did it cut and dry. He's cold-hearted murderer, killed his father, right? Like and some of them even said like this is just about putting a kid in jail. Like this it was like a personal vendetta against this kid. And at this point in the film, we're much farther in at this point, and then it became like everyone realizing like this guy has some latent prejudice against this person, and it's no longer about how bad the area is and like how bad a slum is, but it's like we're not just going to sentence a boy to death because we need to get to the Yankee game. It like this is much more, the stakes are much higher now. We understand that someone's life is at stake. It's no longer just hey, I got to punch the clock and get out of here, which I thought was awesome. It was, and even what's his name, Lee Cobb at this point is just like, even he's done, and he may have been like the last person to go, but it's not even, his mind isn't even changed at this point. It's just he realizes that we needed to sit here this long and talk about this because it's not about getting on with our lives. We need to make sure that we make the right choice and understand that while this is a bad area, that's not the point. We're dealing with one singular life, and we can't just throw it away because we have other things to do.
No, absolutely. I think when you get down to it too, there's certain tangential moments that occur within the back and forth. Obviously, the first time Henry Fonda, juror number 8, says no. The next one to come over is juror number 9. And then the next one is Jack Klugman, juror number 5, who's the paramedic who deals with the violence at the hospital day in, day out, and talks a little bit about how you would use the knife. Because he's a paramedic. He grew up on the streets. He's coming from that environment. He's bettered himself. He's pulled himself out of the gutter. That's a show pun for those that missed it.
Hey.
And that's not being condescending. And condescending means talking down to you. That is being condescending. So, but he knows how to use the knife. And so he talks about that's not how you'd use a switchblade if you knew what to do. If you lived on the streets, you'd know how to use this knife. So he's the next to come over. And that seems to create a little bit of a whirlwind. Because at that point, then you have juror number 11, who's the naturalized citizen, the watchmaker. And so now you've got a kind of the two, I would argue, the two people that are finesse with their hands. They're delicate, they're craftsmen, whether it's a paramedic working on the human body or a watchmaker working on fine gears. The people that are down into the fine details are some of the first that come over. And then that starts bringing everybody else. The next one you have juror number 2, who's the meek bank clerk, for lack of a better term. And then there's a little bit of a surge. And then juror number 12 is honestly my favorite character because he's the only one that as the discussion changes, as it goes between those that are siding with juror number 8 on innocence and those that are siding with juror number 3 on guilty, juror number 12 is the only one that changes his vote, and he does so 3 times. And he goes from guilty to not guilty to guilty to not guilty as he listens, because he's being swayed. He's the advertising executive. He's the marketing guy that is arguably being susceptible to his own game, whereas nobody else in the room is, which says something on some level about marketing people. But I thought that was extraordinarily interesting, that here's a guy that you would assume is well educated, and yet he is the only one that's changing. Once everybody else changes their vote, they stay in that camp. He's the only one that drifts between the two worlds.
Mm-hmm.
So, JP, did you have any thoughts on any of this that you wanted to get into before I drift into a realm that I'm sure I'm going to regret with, general social theory?
I mean, I think that, we were talking about like our favorite jurors, and I think that much like the movie itself, mine kind of ebbed and flowed. So, for example, when juror number 9, the old man, when he comes forward with that, little speech about the witness, right? Like the old man, and, he saw in him a bit of himself. He's an old man. Nobody ever paid much attention to him. Nobody ever quoted him or wanted to know what he thought about anything. So it perfectly explains why he would exaggerate what he knew and how important he was to the case. And I thought that I mean, for me, there's nothing better than like an old man character. You know what I mean? I don't know why. I would just, a relatable. I mean, I'm not an old man, but for some reason, the old man characters just kind of grab on me. A lot of my favorite characters are like, the doddering grandpa, except for Charlie in the Chocolate Factory. That guy was a piece of garbage. But then
we will have to do a rant on that sometime. I'm making a note now because I feel the same way. So,
but then he comes out with this thing about like the woman and the glasses and the dents in her nose, and I was like, wait, where did you get any of that from? Like that seemed a little bit like undeserved, or I don't really know how to define it, but like it just didn't seem to fit with anything. Like, wait, now you're really observant, to things that have already happened that you didn't even think anything of at the time, but now you remember those kind of details. So he kind of lost me on that one.
Right. I will defend that because I do think I understand your point, and it is valid for sure. But they do a great, and again, man, the only person you see do this in modern script writing that I can recall is David Mamet. But the one gentleman takes his glasses off and rubs his nose. And when he rubs his nose, one of the other jurors goes, wait, the woman was doing that. And she must have worn glasses. And then, I mean, and that's, there's a bunch of legal papers on this, and they get into like the whole assumptions of the jury and none of that. Ignore what the lawyers say, because most of it is just there's prosecutors have a 90% plus success rate for a reason, and it's because people read shit like that and listen to it. Your most powerful vote on a jury is guilty or not guilty. You don't need to have a reason for why you say guilty or not guilty. If you think the law is bullshit, you can say not guilty. Look up jury nullification. Just don't ever tell anybody when you're on a jury that you believe in jury nullification. But
or do, and then you don't have to be on a jury.
Well, that's an excellent way. If you're ever on a jury and you'd like to immediately get off, volunteer that you believe and are a strong proponent of jury nullification, and
if that doesn't work,
immediately be removed.
If that doesn't work, just tell them that you were prejudiced against all races and creeds, and they'll get you out of there.
Yes, and the police. You hate the police. If you're gonna, but yeah, so for sure. But no, so getting into some of the social stuff, because I do want to talk a little bit about this. This isn't something I normally get into on the gutter. But since you're here, Shags, we're going to break some rules.
Ooh, okay.
We as a country, as a Western society in general, following the standard demographic transition model, we are definitely transitioning from arguably either a stage 3 to a stage 4 or a stage 4 to a stage 5, either which is a stationary stable to a low stationary or a low stationary to a declining civilization. And then once that decline begins, it never ends. It becomes precipitous and exponential. Historically, nobody, once they've entered the declining phase, has ever pulled out of it. Do you think that has correlation to the modern context? Do you think this film cannot be taken for what it was in 1957 now because of that? Because of our cultural fracturing? Or do you think there is still lessons that can be garnered from the vast majority out of this film?
Do you want me to just tell you how many black pills I take each day, or No, I don't know, man. Like, I don't want to think that it's hard because the cynic in me wants to say, yeah, like this film would not be received well by people, and understanding, like, it could, but I don't know. I mean, there's a part of me that thinks that a lot of what I'm seeing is overblown, and the very, very loud minority that kicks and screams on social media isn't representative of what people really want. I don't know. I know what I do know is that people like timeless storytelling. Uh, I It's a hard question, man. It's hard because
Things aren't easy in the gutter. Life's hard.
yeah, there. I think that this movie. I don't know. I don't. You stumped me, dude. I don't. That's a good. It's a good question. I don't. I One of the things that I find enjoyable in this, and something I try to apply to the stuff I do, is to be juror number 8, to not always be like following what's being said. I think that's really hard for people nowadays because of social media. I think I mean, we are in a vastly different place than when this movie was made. Uh, People weren't aware of everything going on all around the world, at least not as fast as it happens now. Um, and
Well, perspectives are definitely filtered. Even though we have information right at our fingertips, we read it through a different filtered lens, right?
right, yeah,
It was still filtered then, but it was much more refined by the
yeah,
time it got to you. Now it's raw, and it just depends on what the individual, what, it, what's the bias of that first source, and
yeah,
that defines everything now.
right,
Instead of being, ridiculed and dropped through editorial and on the front page of the New York Times 14 hours later.
yeah, yeah,
Can I drop a Molotov cocktail into this conversation?
absolutely,
Absolutely.
Okay, so one thing that I really like to do when I'm watching a movie is semi-ironically root for whoever the film doesn't want me to root for. So, for example, I'm Team Empire, I'm Team Skeksis. And so that's what I did when I watched this movie. And the interpretation I came back with is that 12 Angry Men is a story about one man, juror number 3, trying to resist the efforts of subversion and perversion of justice, only to tragically fail in the end. And this is echoed by the very first and the very last shot of the film, where in the opening shot we see this angle of the courthouse looking up, and it's an image of justice as being very large and larger than life and very imposing. And the very last image that we see in the film is of a diagonal, crooked staircase outside the courthouse, and it's very small, and everything is presented at this weird angle, trying to look around a pillar to symbolize that justice itself has been completely subverted by juror number 8.
that's very interesting. But isn't that almost like goes to my point? Like, the timeless storytelling in this is that, like, you used to be able to interpret film as like art. Like, you and I could stand in front of something at a museum, at a painting in a museum, and gather different feelings based on whatever experiences we've had in our life. If so in that way, like, that's not what I felt in the movie, but it's a really cool way of watching the movie. I totally respect the point of view. Whether or not
I think I may have broken Aldous. He went completely quiet.
he's rebooting at the moment.
Oh no, I tend
Oh,
to
thank
agree. So in my second viewing of this week, I did something similar. Is I watched it and tried to put myself in juror number 3's position, and juror number 3 is the last to come around and say not guilty, but he doesn't do so out of an ideological reason. He doesn't do so because he's agreeing with the general assumption that's being made. He's just been beaten down emotionally because early on he tells the story of he had a physical altercation with his son and he hit him. And since he hit his son hasn't spoken to him. And so he starts internalizing it and it becomes personal. And so the not guilty, when he finally says not guilty, it's not because of any of the discussion that's been going on. It's certainly not because of any of the analytics. It's personal. It's emotional. The last thing you should be in a jury room is emotional. Everybody should be like juror number 4. Everybody should be analytical, but man is not analytical. And so I think that's the telling, is that at the end of the day, what is justice? Justice is 12 men, all from different backgrounds, some being bigoted, some being biased in their outlooks, some being perfectly analytical, some being a complete bleeding heart that's just going to ask questions that are immaterial to what was presented, to some looking back on their referential background and their experience and trying to come up with something from that. But each individual one, and then of course you've always have these, and this is where we're going to get into some of the Ash conformity principle. You're always going to have people like juror number 2 that are just swayed by the majority, and it doesn't matter what the facts are. It's what everybody else is doing. I'm going to go and I'm going to take the easiest road. And that becomes the interpersonal question to me of watching this, is which juror do you self-identify with and why? And I'll present that question to both of you gentlemen.
Okay.
Really quick sidebar though, juror number 2, what do you call that character archetype? You know what I mean? Like the really meek sounding person who, like, I feel like he's in like every Western, you know what I mean? Like, but maybe he's just a barber somewhere, but like, I don't, like, it feels like a really familiar archetype of character, but I just can't, place the wording for it.
Yeah, I don't know what you would call that character. I disagree that you see him in every movie. There's certainly, and I always go back to the Western, because if there's anything that's quintessential with storytelling, it is the Western. And as a sidebar, if you want to challenge yourself, if you think yourself a good storyteller, write a good original Western.
Okay.
I want to see a good original Western. If you can't write an original Western, don't put good ahead of yourself when you describe yourself as a writer.
Don't put good ahead of yourself anyway. It's the worst word you could possibly use.
Well, there's that.
I'm the goodest.
You are, because est, superlative always. But when you're talking about High Noon does not have that type of character in it. Everybody is against Gary Cooper's character and never comes around. It was done shockingly better in the sci-fi adaptation of High Noon, Outland, from 1981 with Sean Connery, personally, I think, than it was done in High Noon to show that there's not that meek character that just comes around and is swayed by the majority. You see that a lot in some of the spaghetti westerns, certainly in a lot of the Clint Eastwood westerns. You'll see that character that kind of comes around. But in the classic Americana westerns, you don't see that, because I don't think that's that's not an American trait historically. At least not one that we like to talk about. We like to talk about juror number 8, who's he's the individual that's speaking out against what the majority believe. We like to celebrate that. And while we don't like to celebrate it, juror number 3, there's a lot of that too. We like that. We like people that are passionate and firebrand. All you need to do is take a look at the local, your local news headline and see that. Anybody that can be outrageous and over the top is certainly celebrated as well. But drifting back to that question, and with that in mind, that each of these jurors represents an individual facet of personality and our culture in some way, shape, or form that can be defined however we want to define it, or however you want to define it. Which juror is it that you personally self-identify with, and why?
I don't want to be that guy, but juror number 8, because I find myself being like, like, I don't know. I've never been able to just dig in my heel one way or another on a lot of things. I'm usually just, I want to ask questions. Like we owe it to someone to, and even stuff on Twitter, like where some, certain words get thrown around to describe a group of people, and I'm like, well, is that the case? Like, at least ask the question, like, and work recursively backwards. Like, is that really what it is, or are you just being reactionary for the sake of being reactionary, because it'll get you clicks or something like that? Now it's a different situation, but I just like how his whole character starts off, because it would be exactly what I was thinking at the time. Like, hey, things aren't adding up. Like, it's okay to ask this question. We shouldn't just be so, you know, get up, get out of here because you have shit to do. Like, we're sentencing someone to death. Like, so like I said, I know it might sound cliche, but juror number 8 for me.
I mean, being a contrarian, I would be juror number 8. But if I was in the room with juror number 8, I would be juror number 8's juror number 8.
So you'd be juror number 3, essentially, in that case. Just because those two are
yeah, but I'm not going to start crying about my kid. Come on, man.
Right. No, and that's where this film, that's the only weak spot of this film for me, is that the transition from guilty to not guilty from juror number 3 is, it seems forced. And it does. It comes across like a stage play. And I think Arrogant Ape even said that earlier in the chat, that it's a perfect one-room play. And it really does. I don't think I've ever seen anything that has that one locale with actors moving about in it. That's better choreographed for actor placement and dialogue exchange than this film. But that being said, it does feel forced and rushed there at the end. That's such an emotional turn of phrase, so to speak. I did want to touch on one of the things that was stated in chat, if I can scroll up and find it. It was a question by Corey Barton. Here we go. So what is it all for? Is it a murder or yes? So the entire basis of this is a young gentleman is accused of killing his father with a knife. And you catch the end of the criminal proceeding, the end of the courtroom, and the jury is released for deliberations. And you don't know anything. You see the defendant briefly, you see the prosecutor briefly, and then it goes right to the jury room, and you know nothing of what happened. And then as they discuss the case, everything comes out of who the eyewitnesses were and what they saw and where they were and where the murder took place, how the murder took place, what the murder implement was. And it's all relayed through the discourse. And that's something of note as well for storytelling, in that the story is entered into with a lot of questions, but all of the questions are answered by the end. Every time they discuss a topic, there's no need for exposition, because the assumption is they're relaying it to each other. They're going, no, but, and it's all stuff that's already happened, and it's all been laid out, and they're just discussing it, but they're discussing it out of order. They're discussing that this witness said this at this time, but that contradicts what this witness said. And it's very well laid out, it's very well structured, but you're getting it in broken dialogue format. And that's something you don't see too often anymore, because when you're doing something like that, you need to have the oversight of, one, it needs to be well articulated, and then two, you need to have an intelligence audience that can actually absorb that and follow it, which, based off of everything that modern Hollywood has been producing over the last decade or so, indicates that they don't think very highly of their audience. So all of Corey's questions are usually about sexy alien babes. Yes, I'm thrilled to death that Corey asked something that wasn't about tits or ass. It is wonderful.
Going back to what you were saying about it being a play, I definitely agree with you that it feels very much like you're watching a play. And what's really fascinating to me is there are other films, film adaptations to plays. Glengarry Glen Ross definitely feels like a play. Death of a Salesman definitely feels like a play. But to give a shout out to one that's kind of unreal, if you think about it, A Bronx Tale is an adaptation of a one-man stage play, and that fact just blows my mind.
Yes, yeah. Chaz Palmiotti.
Written
Actually,
by Chaz Palminteri. That's crazy.
yeah. We should actually do an episode on that. The story behind that is amazing, as to how that came about and how that film was adapted. But similar to that, drifting back to our topic at hand, one of the most powerful things in A Bronx Tale is just the sense of responsibility and the sense of loyalty. How much of a sense of loyalty to your patriotic duty do you see in the individuals? I mean, obviously you've got some jurors that aren't taking it seriously, but in general, were you impressed with the undercurrent of social responsibility in this? And when I say social responsibility, I'm saying this is a solemn act of being on a jury.
No, when I watched it, I was actually pretty disappointed. Like most people, like it was obvious that most of them they heard what they wanted to hear, and they were making their decision based on on that. And again, it was another like sort of nice little gem that you just could apply this to today, and especially how juror number 2, like he couldn't articulate his position, which I see all the time, like online. Like, well, back that up. Well, it was just obvious. Well, give us an example. I mean, like people stumble over their words. They can't actually come out and say what they think. So, to that, I thought it was sort of it was a failure on the part of their true like civic duty of like, you have like your one job is to give this guy a fair trial, or this guy gets a fair shake, and you look at the evidence and they make a point to say like this is a murder trial, like the punishment is death, like that's it. If you convict him, done. He's gonna die. So watching everyone just sort of a lot of them not really be able to articulate their positions properly was pretty disappointing.
I think the line that captures that best is when, I don't remember which juror it was, but one of the jurors says there is always one, as in like there should be more. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say I think it was Cobb that says, it was what's his name? What juror? I can't. The racist dude. No. Why isn't his picture up here?
Juror 10.
10. Yeah, it was juror number 10. Yeah.
Yeah. As if like this should be treated like more casually.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I mean, I think it's obvious with the want to go to the Yankees game guy, but I think that line really captures it. There's always one. Yep. You got to keep talking about this.
Yeah. Well, even too, like how. Like they're like, well, let's just sit here for an hour, and then everyone's like, well, what should we talk about? And then juror 8's like, no, we're gonna talk about the case. We're not gonna sit here and talk about your mom's whatever. Like he's, like there's a point. We're here for a reason.
Right. So, no, and Snuggie brings up an excellent point, which is most people, heard what they want to hear, and most people see what they want to see. Earlier tonight on Global Frequency Studios, Neff was talking about this. Bias, personal bias, and especially conformity bias. I mean, you come to a conclusion, and then from there on out, everything you see will justify that conclusion. That's something that consciously everybody should be aware of, and you should be looking to disprove your thesis or your conclusion, not look to reinforce it. But man, most people want to be proven right. So, and it's great to see Matthew Fowler. I consider Matthew the voice of a generation, so it's great to see him around. Thank you, sir. So, kind of, I guess, reaching this out, Shags.
Yeah.
When you're this film, obviously, I mean, you chose to talk about it, and I've really appreciated the discourse on it.
Yeah.
If people head over to your channel, you've got such eruditely entitled shows as Ready, Set, Shag, as well as the Midweek Hump.
Mm-hmm.
Should people look forward to this level of discourse on those particular shows?
Not on the Midweek Hump. That show is meant to be like people sitting in a garage drinking beer and just agreeing with each other all the time. My solo one-on-one podcast, Ready Set Shag, is more of the intellectual discussion, where I just sort of deep dive into people's lives a little bit, them as content creators or public figures, and it really it sounds stupid, but I've said 100 times, like, if I could have Joe Rogan's job, I would take it, because I could talk to people for that much time. Like, I could talk to people for that long, and I could do this for 3 hours. I mean, you and I have done shows together. Like, I can just kind of go down the rabbit hole, and maybe it's something from my childhood. I don't know. I'm still seeing a doctor about that. But
I think to a degree, I mean, no matter how old you are, and I commiserate greatly with JP with his appreciation and being drawn to usually the older character in most things. Whether it's I've got an old soul or I'm just a bitter old man in a young body, I always find that perspective to be the most intriguing. But I do think, to parlance your words into a literary allusion even further, there's a piece of us that always wants to be Alice, to follow that rabbit down the hole and go into Wonderland, where everything is magical and it's different and it's new and it's something we haven't seen before.
Yeah.
And never lose that, for sure, because I mean, you need to have a balance, but you always got to make sure that you check yourself. You got to make sure that read whatever you're reading, whatever you're watching, whatever you're doing. Don't take yourself too seriously. Don't be afraid to dance in the rain, type of an outlook.
Yeah, no, it's something that I wanted to bring up real quick before just so people can hear. One of the really truly great things about this movie is how it builds tension from beginning to end. So those of you who do watch it, like, keep an eye on the cinematography and how it goes from this sort of like wide angle, seeing everyone in the room, and how it slowly, I mean, in moments of tension, it closes in on people really well. But by the end, you're in people's faces the entire time. And it just, again, you could watch this movie without any sound or just subtitles and completely understand what's happening, because it's not influenced by a soundtrack or anything. You just totally understand what's happening by, like, who's talking and how they're feeling, the expression on their face, their body language, all of that. And it's why it's so masterfully done. And there's a few contrived moments. I'll admit that were, with the glasses part, like, I could see that being sort of an eye rolly moment. Like, really, like, now you're remembering your doubts. But no, this was a fantastic conversation. Something that I wouldn't have wanted to do with anyone else. So thanks for thinking of me, man. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Well, I appreciate you coming on, for sure. You're not quite out of the gutter yet. We've got a little bit longer we can go on.
Okay, good.
Try not to keep it, I try to keep it around an hour, but we've got a little bit of wiggle room, and I feel like we're making some good points here.
Yeah.
You
totally.
mentioned, and you mentioned that earlier about turning the sound off and just watching the film. One of the things we normally cover here, because of my personal passion for it, is comics. And when you're talking about sequential art, one of the tests that I always like to do anytime I get a new book in my hand is I like just to flip through it and not read a word, and just flip through it. And I should be able to flip through your book and be able to get just a general gist of what the theme and the story is.
Yeah.
And then what I expect when I read it is, when I open those pages and start spending time in reading it and actually paying attention to the art, yes, that initial story that I flipped through is still there, but I want to see multi-layers. I want to see some depth. I want to see good storytelling. I want to see an understanding of character development. I want to see, it doesn't necessarily have to be an Act 1, Act 2, Act 3 structure, but I do want to see structure to that story. Structure that builds that drama, and I want to see those page turns mean something. And that's the same way with film, is when you press that mute button, you're taking the auditory out. It's the same as not reading that book and just flipping through the pages. Yeah. And you can even put it on double time and start watching as, like, how are transitions used? How are wipes used?
Yep.
Do you use a fade to black, or do you use a crosscut? When you're doing those things and you're watching it from just a purely visual angle, it changes, because the way the human brain works, whether you're reading something and looking at a picture like a comic, or you're listening to something and watching a movie or a TV show, you're conflating the two. So if you remove one sense and just focus on the other, you'll see either something that's irreparably broken or why it works with its associated media that's been added on, whether that's text in the form of a comic book or auditory in the form of a movie or TV show. That's something that I feel is sorely lacking, that you don't see too much. In days of, back in the dark, decadent 1980s, back when, reading comprehension and film appreciation were still taught and reverenced as, actual schools of thought. Those were things that you were told to do. You would flip through something and look at it and then read it, or you would, watch something without the sound. Or the other thing, and this is amazing. I wouldn't recommend it necessarily with this film, but a film like, it might work with this film. I've never tried it, and that's to put it on and have it as background noise and just listen to the audio. And, one of the things I constantly tell new and young writers when they're having a really hard time writing dialogue is go listen to old-time radio, because old-time radio only has one thing working for it, and that's auditory. And voice actors can do a lot, but they can't, even a good voice actor can't fix a bad script. And so what you get is because it's spoken only, you get good dialogue inherently. So if you want to learn how to write it, listen to good dialogue. Go to some place where you're going to hear smart people talk and listen to that. But once you get that down, and once you get that understanding and you've got it in your vernacular and you understand how to construct good dialogue, then you can start dumbing it down. But you need to have that structure set first. And it's the same way with a film. Watch it without the sound and then listen to it without the visual. And does it still work? Everything should work piecemeal as a story before you assemble it. And then once you assemble it, it should be something magnificent and beautiful.
Right. There's real quick, and I don't want to go down this hole because it will take us into a whole other thing, but it's something that I really like about V for Vendetta is that, like, Hugo Weaving, right? That's his name.
Yes.
Yeah. So like the way that he voice acts V is so incredible, because you don't need to see his face to understand how he's feeling at any point. He just does it so well. It's so awesome to listen. It's so awesome to listen to him play that character. I mean, at least in my opinion, I know some people don't really love that movie, but I think it's great, and he's a big reason for that. Anyways, back to the movie at hand.
No, that's great, man. And I guess there I'm going to ask for kind of closing thoughts. I mean, I encourage everybody, if you look in the description of the show, you will find a link to the Shagsworth YouTube. I highly recommend you subscribe. Hopefully we'll be getting something going with the Midnight Oil eventually again and get that rolling forward. I really enjoyed a couple episodes of that. There were other episodes that were not so much, but hey man, I can only take so much Obi-Wan. So
That's all right. I'm done with Disney Star Wars. So
God, it took you long enough. Okay.
I know.
That being said, also in the description is a link to my co-host JP's Eudaimonia Comics, both his Twitter and his YouTube. Make sure you're subscribed. Listen to the Noirlam Ashcan is currently on Fund My Comic, and How to Die 2 launched on Kickstarter. JP, do you have anything you wanted to say about promoting either one of those?
Get them now. I'm a man of few
Probably
words.
The finest sales pitch I have ever heard in the history of the show.
Do it!
On that note, this has been The Gutter. Thank you so much for joining us. Have a good evening.
This is blood for blood and by the gallons. This is the old days, man, the bad days, the all or nothing days. They're back. There's no choices left.
You're still here? It's over. Go home.